Hello and welcome to FretDojo.com, which is all about mastery of jazz guitar. My name's Greg O'Rourke, and in today's episode, I've got something really exciting to share with you. The interview I conducted recently with critically acclaimed jazz guitarist Mark Whitfield. This is really good stuff. You're going to really enjoy this interview. I got a lot just out of talking to Mark for an hour. So yeah, hope you can join me for this, and we'll get right into it right after this. It's my pleasure to welcome to Fret Dojo the fabulous Mark Whitfield, one of the most highly regarded jazz guitarists of modern times. So I have to say I'm a little bit nervous about this interview, Mark, because it's not often someone like this comes along to my dojo. So yeah, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, and don't be nervous at all. We're just two guys who love the guitar and here to talk about it, share what we know. Yeah, congratulations on all the success of your site. I'm glad to be a part of it. Talking about jazz and talking about guitar is what I love to do the most. So you fire away.
Thank you so much for coming on, Mark. And it's a real honor to have you here. So for those of you that don't know about Mark, I actually had to prepare a few notes that I'm going to read off here just to tell you about the kind of players that he's played with over the years. It's absolutely insane. Mark has had collaborations with Dizzy Gillespie, Art Blakey, Herbie Hancock, Quincy Jones, Wynton Marsalis, and Branford Marsalis, George Benson, who is one of his main teachers, Jimmy Smith, Jack McDuff, one of my favorite jazz blues players, and many others as well, and even Sting. And Mark studied at the Berklee College of Music and has also had record deals with Verve and Warner Brothers as well. So it's great to have you on the show, Mark. And I thought today we could talk a bit about journey with jazz guitar. You know, where it all started, and where it took you from there. And also, in particular, I'd like to talk to you a bit about jazz blues, because I'm doing a series at the moment on my website about jazz blues guitar, and I think you're definitely the man to talk about when it comes to that, because one of my friends, Matt Warnock, recommended me that I listen to one of your tracks off your first album, Marksman, as one of the best examples of jazz blues playing that he's ever come across. So it's not often you get to talk about a transcription with someone that's still alive.
Well, that's very flattering. Thank you. Yeah. When I hear you use the term jazz blues, it makes me realize that as I was coming up learning to play, I definitely didn't have a specific style or something that specific in mind for how I wanted to apply what I was hearing. You know, I just have always kind of been on this journey that has taken some very unexpected turns over the years, and has gotten me from where I started to where I am now. I started out, I grew up on Long Island in a little town called Lindenhurst, which is a suburb about an hour outside of New York City. And my parents, had a great appreciation for music and for jazz especially, but they weren't musicians. In fact, no one in my family was a professional musician. I'm the only one. And my brother David got a guitar for his homecoming present from Vietnam. My sister brought him a guitar because my brother loved the blues. And he couldn't play. So on my 7th birthday, he gave it to me. And he's like, well, you gave me a guitar. I don't know what to do with it. Here, little brother. You give it a shot. And I must have done something with it that displayed a sort of natural affinity for the instrument, because within a few weeks, my mom had gotten me some lessons at a local music store, and my brother gave me a record, the Lightning Hopkins, Anthology of the Blues. So I was this little 7-year-old kid on Long Island checking out Lightning Hopkins, who was seemingly from another planet, considering where I was growing up. And then my parents took me to see concerts. So I got to see the Ellington Orchestra, I got to see Count Basie, took me to see Ella Fitzgerald. I saw Oscar Peterson. You know, before I was even 10 years old, they took me to all these concerts at a place called the Westbury Music Fair, which is a great music venue out on Long Island, not too far from where I grew up. So, all right, so that's kind of how I got started. So here I was, you know, taking lessons with a guitar teacher at a local music store. And my teacher was more of a 70s fusion guy. You know, this was 1974, 1975. My teacher, Vincent Nazaro, he was a student at a school on Long Island. I forget what school he was going to then. And he was teaching lessons on the side, you know, just to help make ends meet. And he took a liking to me right away because he could see that I had some ability, albeit I was not that dedicated. You know, music for me was just a hobby. I had no intention of becoming a professional. I didn't even really know how to go about that. If it had ever come to mind, I wouldn't even have known how to start. One thing I'll always say is I always seem to be drawn to the blues. Not necessarily as a specific genre, just as a form of expression. When if I heard a recording or I heard a solo or I heard something, it didn't really matter how sophisticated or simple it was. If it had some element of the blues that felt kind of authentic and real, it usually got my attention, you know, and I can say that even when I look back to being 9 or 10 years old and not really knowing anything about music, I was already sort of drawn to that. And then, so I played bass in the orchestra school, and because I could read, the band director used me on the bass, upright bass, in the high school jazz band. We went to Berkeley for the high school jazz band competition when I was in the 10th grade, and I won a scholarship to attend Berkeley on the bass. I was not interested, right? And so then that following summer, my parents retired, and we moved what seemingly was way across the world to Seattle, Washington, which was, you know, a new experience. Only the jazz band there, they didn't have the guitar player. And so here was my shot to finally play guitar in an organized school ensemble. So I took it. And then I kind of found my thing. You know, all of a sudden, it was more than a casual affinity. Now all of a sudden I was practicing 3 and 4 hours a day and trying to, you know, transcribe things off records. And I was really getting into this whole guitar thing, right? And so we went to another Berkeley-sponsored high school jazz competition in Westminster in Canada, and I won a second scholarship. And that all of a sudden I got my attention. Wait a minute, I might be onto something here, you know.
I reckon.
Yeah, I'm just really lucky. One of the. So then it was time to graduate high school, and I had to choose, you know, what college I was going to attend. And everyone in my family was completely against me going to music school and going to become a musician. And it had only entered the conversation because I won these scholarships. Now I was like, wait a minute, I could try this. So I convinced my parents to let me go to Berkeley. And our deal was within a few months, I would be able, you know, I would be able to tell realistically if I was good enough to keep up with, you know, with the best students there, or if I thought I might catch up to the best students. And if not, you know, I mean, it was my future I was gambling with. So if I didn't think I had what it took, I would just, you know, drop out and re-enroll someplace else and you know, go back to try something else for a living. And so, you know, when I got to Boston, within a few weeks, I was done. I knew I had found my path. I had found the right place for me. And then I noticed that as I was practicing more intensely and focusing on the things that I could not do, as well as, you know, some of the guitar players who were there, I started to have some problems with my right arm. You know, I had a weird technique, a kind of homegrown technique, and I used to keep my palm pressed against the top of the guitar. So it just so happens Kevin Eubanks, who had just made his first record, was coming back to Berkeley, where he'd gone to school, to give a master class. So I went to see him, and I bothered him after the class, and I just said to him that I was having a problem. I needed some help. And he said, well, let me see what your hand was. Let me see what's going on. And so I started to play. He's like, oh God, that's the ugliest technique I've ever seen, And so within 5 minutes or so, he straightened me out, gave me just what I needed. I had to sort of start over. Luckily I had that entire summer, before my second year, to figure out how to play and kind of imagine my right arm as a straight, as 2 points, for a straight line of energy. And by the time I got back to school in September, I was pain free and on my way. But then I was discovering all this new music. I sent my kids to Berkeley, each one of them, they went to school with an iTunes account that had 8,000 songs in it. When I enrolled at Berkeley in 1983, I had a record player and 18 records. And I knew most of every note of all those records, but that's all I had.
That's an interesting point you've brought up there, Mark, because maybe that's an issue these days, is that there's too much choice, and people don't spend enough time digging deep on transcriptions, because it actually, you do need to really kind of be married to a transcription for a while to get the flavor out of it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I heard lots of my jazz heroes talk about the importance that transcription, the role that transcription played in their development. Joe Henderson said that he had transcribed so much Lester Young, and the process of transcription had trained his ear to the point that when he started playing gigs, people thought he had perfect pitch. But you can just imagine how difficult it was back then to transcribe a Lester Young solo. You got the clunky record player and a very sensitive, moody needle you're trying to move back and forth. Once you scratch the record, it's ruined, And so I think now for a lot of music students, transcriptions are too readily available, too easy to come by. And therefore I don't feel often that students are spiritually connected. Not in the metaphysical sense, but in terms of being truly committed to the notes that they're learning and the significance of that they play in terms of how you want to express yourself. Because there's just so much information. And so the really, really good students, really talented kids, they find their way anyway, because they're just not satisfied until they get there. And I see that, if you're really driven and you really want to play, you're not satisfied with just being able to play some notes. You want to get it. And so I see that with my kids and with students that I was teaching when I was at Berkeley and just in general. So I don't think that, I don't share this opinion that technology is somehow ruining our love for music. I just realize it's become a crutch for people sometimes who aren't that devoted. But yeah, so for me, I got my first West Montgomery record, my first semester at Berkeley. And until that point, because I played bass, I had a couple of Pablo records. Those records with Oscar Peterson, and Herb Ellis, and Ray Brown, and Bobby Durham, and also Clark Terry, and a common, a usual suspect for most of those recordings was Joe Pass. And I didn't really know anything about him, but I was very used to hearing him play. Because I was listening to Ray Brown, trying to figure out how to play those bass lines in these big band charts in my 10th grade stage band, And so when I got the chance to sit in the guitar chair, I started to reference those recordings. And my favorite at that point was one called Portraits of Ellington, Portraits of Duke. And it's Joe, Ray Brown, and Bobby Durham playing drums. And it's just, they play 8 or 9 Ellington classics. And it sounds like they were in Norman Granz's living room recording, and it sounds great. It's amazing. And Joe was interesting because he was very sophisticated in terms of his ability to navigate the instrument. He had a very complex orchestral approach, almost like he was playing a piano, to playing, from my perspective as a guitar player. He had a very wide spectrum that he could deal with, and he played small voicings and clusters and spread, and he moved all these voices at once, inner voices and melody and bass. For me, what he used to tie all that together was this amazing sense of blues. And, at the end of an 8-bar, flurry of 16th notes and, a combination of Bird and all this, he would play a blues lick that just brought it all home. And it didn't feel like he was saying, okay, now I'm going to play a blues lick that's going to bring it all home. It was just at the end of a phrase, he would just drop it. Here it is, bam. Now sit on that, let that sink in for a second. And I love that, and so those were the things I was, between him, listening to him, and of course my dad had bought me a copy of Breezin'. And that's really, I think, was my initial original inspiration to playing. When I heard George Benson, so I saw him playing I saw him on TV playing the music from that record. And anyone who's ever seen George live or on television, you understand how ridiculous that is. I mean, he made it look so simple, and it is so insanely complex. But it was so soulful. There was so much blues. There was so much fire and energy and confidence and swing and all these things. And I was just barely scratching the surface. But what I knew that I wanted to do more than anything else was I wanted to keep my connection to the blues and somehow use that as a commonality, a way to express myself, and a way to bridge the gaps, a way to, as a conduit to find other levels of expression. And I think I was drawn to those things. And sometimes I feel like when I strayed away, the universe brought me back. So I stayed at Berklee for 4 years. I had a couple of different guitar teachers. I was 16 years old. I graduated from high school a year early. I had some private instruction, but not a whole lot. I didn't know anything about theory. I didn't understand more than just the basic building blocks for chords. I didn't know anything about chord scales. I was just, it's a wonder to me that I wanted any scholars to do anything, because I didn't know. But I did play a lot. I played with my friends. I had some command of the instrument. In fact, it was probably deceptive. Probably looking back, it probably seemed like I knew more than I did, because I could play some things really well with a lot of confidence. And at that point, you only played a few things, and then the next kid played. It's like I could hide behind that, But when I got to Berklee, I had never been around that many guitar players. I mean, I think there couldn't have been more than 3,000 students enrolled at the campus at that time. Berklee's a much bigger school now. But it seemed like at least 60% of those kids were guitar players. And Berklee was basically 2 buildings in the Back Bay section of Boston. It was the 150 building. And then around the corner was 1140, where we took all our private lessons. I remember coming out of the dormitory on my first day and looking down the street. It just seemed like, as far as I could see, was a sea of gig bags. Just, guys with guitars on their shoulders. I was, man, I have arrived. And then I panicked. Oh my God, how can I will never be able to keep up with any of these, How do first I got to get a gig bag, because I'm going to lose carrying around a heavy guitar case.
Yeah.
So, and there was sort of a movement. You have to remember, this is Berklee in 1983. At that point, John Scofield and Mike Stern had just recently left Boston. Pat Metheny was still lurking about. John Abercrombie had become very popular. His presence, and a lot of guys who kind of played that way, their presence of that concept and of this future, this sort of modern, effects-driven, experimental style of guitar, that had become really prevalent. a lot of the students were coming there to learn how to do that. And so it made sense that they were hiring younger teachers who were interested. Some of the guys they hired had gone to school with John, with Schofield or Mike. They knew these guys, and that didn't really appeal to me. It's not that, I've become relatively good friends with Sco and certainly with Mike, and I taught a week at a guitar workshop once with John Abercrombie. I think he's amazing. I clearly hadn't come that far yet in this my chronological study and my journey to internalize everything that jazz guitar means to me. I was still trying to figure out exactly where Django Reinhardt came from, who was Charlie Christian, and how did he do all that he did in literally 2.5 years on the scene. That's pretty much it. He came, he's gone, just like that.
That's right.
And he changed, he changed the guitar for the next 100 years. And so I didn't care about anybody and their effects pedals at that point. All I wanted to know was, how did this cat, where did he come from, and how did he do what he did? And there were a few, at that point, the chairman of the guitar department was a guy named William Levitt, and he wrote all the method books. And he had been a studio. I think he played for NBC Studios back when studios had orchestras and all that. He was so the sound of jazz guitar was part of what he did. So everything that was built into all the methods. So there were some of the older teachers. I could hang out with them and learn some. But then, we come to the next part of this, and listen, you feel free to cut. I was just talking.
Oh no, man, I'm really enjoying just listening to your story, man. So yeah, keep rolling.
All right, so I realized along the way, and I say this a lot, and I know sometimes it can be a little daunting for a student to hear this, but no one can really teach you how to play jazz. I can teach a student. How to tune the instrument, how to hold the instrument, how to get the most, out of your technique. I can give you exercises to improve that. I can help you with ear training. I can point you, not necessarily in the right direction, but in a direction that I think makes sense to help you get the most out of what it is you're trying to do based on what I've learned over the years. But what makes jazz so beautiful and so wonderful, and the blues is a big part of that, is that it represents each individual player's relationship with themselves and the music and the world around them. And you have to figure that out for yourself. And figuring that out is what makes it so great. Because when you finally start to establish a relationship with the notes and the scales and the chords and all these things, you end up with a sound that's unmistakably and uniquely your own. And when that happens, I think for those of us who are on this journey, there's no greater feeling than waking up one day, picking up your instrument and realizing, wow, I sound like me, and that's not bad. I sound like me, and it's not bad. It's okay. It's not great, but it's not bad. And there's no one particular way that you get there. But all the things I think that have to be there are, the basic building blocks. You have to have the fundamentals, your basic fundamentals as a musician. You have to have a good time. You have to have a good ear. You have to be sensitive and know how to, and you have to be confident and be able to play it and stand on your own 2 feet and play, And so, and I learned this much kind of by accident, just by seeing guys do it. So I want to tell you my Joe Pass story.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd love to hear your time with Joe Pass, man. But maybe just before we do though, we'll get to that in a minute, Mark. But I think you've raised something really interesting here. Like I think that was absolute gold. Then when you said, like a teacher can't, like the student has to do the work basically, like to find their voice. But what do you think are some of the main things that a student of jazz needs to do to facilitate that off their own bat, as opposed to just relying on a teacher?
Well, I mean, we have to think about jazz as a language, and that doesn't mean that there are only 10 phrases and everybody has to know them. It's just there are 10 phrases that everyone has to know to get started. You know, my name is Mark. Where's the bathroom? Can I have a glass of water? It's like learning to speak a foreign language, you know, and you should start simple. And as you begin to get the sound of the language in your ear, then you can take liberties with it, you know. So it's kind of like a little kid learning to speak the language he hears his parents speak, you know. And so I think for me, starting to think about it in that way made it a little simpler. It's like, okay, so I don't know all of what that guy just played, but it's okay. I don't have to know just yet. But I did recognize something. So let me I recognize that phrase or that one thing he played over these 2 bars, that really spoke to me. So let me just sit with that for a second and break it down. Okay, and I realized, you know, it's a 2-5-1 pattern. It's, you know, it's a substitution. It's E minor, A7, D major. And so if I learn this phrase and play it, now I know that when I get to a point in the music where there's E minor 7, D major 7, I have one thing I know I can play that will sound good. And then so I get it. And so then I move on to the next thing, you know, and I've got 2 things. And before you know it, you know, I've got 10 or 15 of these phrases that I really know how to play in that one place. So now my challenge is, how do I expand on it? So you learn to play each phrase in a different key. You know, you learn to play each phrase in all 12 keys, and then you mix them up, and then, you know, you add one phrase to the next before you know it. And, you know, and so effective practice sometimes can sound like just meandering to somebody standing by. You know, my mom, she was not a musician, but to her, she understood that effective practice had to be regimented. So she set an egg timer that was set to 30 minutes, and she wanted to hear scales, and the lessons that my teacher gave me for those 30 minutes, or my practicing what I did was a waste of time. You know, so but I mean, you know, but then I get it. That's how she made sense of this abstract application of learning music. Was a nurse, so that was something tangible. This was something sort of intangible. But so for me, all right, I get the scales out of the way, whatever. Now I got this phrase. I'm just gonna screw around with it, and I'm just, I'm gonna learn how to do something. Change one note. What happens if I change this note? What happens if I throw this chord in? Just try it. And each time that I would experiment with something, try something different, it opened up yet another pathway to another creative suggestion. Oh, well, if I did that, then maybe I can try this. And I found, I continued to follow, follow the clues. 50 paces to the right, dig 10 feet, pick up, object Y, and then wow, there's a map. You keep following these unknown pathways, and at the end of the week, I've got a new thing, a new sound, something else I've discovered. And so this is why I say there was nothing bad about my time at Berklee, because being at Berklee gave me basically all day, every day to do this. I get up in the morning, I go to a class about music, learn something I didn't know. I got a break, I go back to my room, practice. Then I have a jam with some friends for lunch, and then go back to it. I was in music student heaven, where I could just be a musician all day, every day. And I didn't know anything. So everybody there, I felt everybody who was a decent player, a decent student, knew more than me. So I learned something from everybody. I was a security guard who had been a former student. He used to sit, by the emergency exit on the 4th floor. And he would tell me things about West Montgomery. I was like, wow. You know what I mean? So, I think it's great for a student, for someone who's serious about learning to play. It's wonderful if you have the opportunity to go someplace where you can just do that. Because let me tell you, well, no, once you leave school and you're out in the real world, you got other things to do.
That's right.
You really long for the time you could just get up and just play guitar, or just like listen to Charlie. You know what I mean? Those days, they're gone before you know it. So I look back at my time at Berkeley, and I realized, man, I got everything out of that, you know. And I didn't have nearly as mature an outlook to describe it the way I can describe it now. Back then, I was just panicked because I was in love with the guitar, in love with music, and I sucked. Everybody was better than me, you know. And so I was like, oh God, how do I get better, you know? And so I went at it like I didn't have much time. You know, I went at it like I could see the clock ticking, and I was going to get to the finish line with everybody else and not be ready. And I'm too competitive, and I had too much pride to let that happen, right? And so, and I just loved playing, you know, and you know, and there was no greater high than being on stage with some guys. And we're playing something together, not even something that we rehearsed or worked, just a tune that we all knew. And you know, and I felt like I was having a dialogue, an exchange of ideas beyond what we could talk about, you know. And I'm giving it. There's something about tapping in to that form of expression that you know, it's a high like nothing else, you know. And so I got to do that, like I said, every day for 4 years. So that was great.
Just on that, Mark, this is really interesting because a lot of my audience members are, you know, they're kind of in a situation you described quite well. Then, you know, that they've got families, they've got busy jobs. You know, what if for someone in that sort of situation, how do you think they could best? Obviously, that they could. It would be unrealistic to think they could ever get to a level like yourself, obviously with that limited amount of time. But how do you think they could make satisfying progress with what they did in their practice? You know, what's the most essential ingredients they could include in their practice?
First of all, I would just like to say, while your point does make sense, you know, that's kind of how Wes Montgomery started. You know, he had 2 jobs. He wasn't playing. Of course, Wes Montgomery was extraordinarily gifted. You know, there's only one of him in history, which, you know, I get that. But, you know, he practiced at night after he got off from work. That's how he started. You know? But, I think I know what it's like to not have a lot of time every day to devote to practicing. So when you need to break it down to what can I do to yield the greatest results with an hour and a half or whatever I've got, you know, I think then having a routine, a schedule to follow, is a very effective way to solve that problem. That way, you know, you make sure that you have proper time management so you get the most out of it. And then 2, if you do it and you start to feel like you're making progress, it inspires you to press forward, to press on, because there's nothing more frustrating, you know, or defeating than if you look back like, man, I've been working on this for a month and I haven't gotten anywhere. Screw it, you know. And so I think it's always good to start with a measure of technique. I think it's always good. All the greats will always have some sort of routine, a practice, you know, a technical regimen that I liken to calisthenics. You know, it's just a warm up, that way. And, you know, and as a young musician, I did it because I needed to develop my technique, but I did not understand the significance. You know, I'd hear older guys say, when you get older, you're gonna have all these arthritis and you're tired, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, come on, I can do this forever, you know. And now I'm older. And so I understand how important it is to take good care of whatever your chops are, you know. And in our case, it's this, you know, and you have to cherish it, you know. And so proper blood flow, I think, comes from slow, almost stagnant motion with pressure. And so I always would start out with a technical regimen that included a metronome, which drives my wife crazy.
Yeah.
She always said,
Nothing more can sort of rile up the household members
"Oh,
than a loud metronome for
yeah."
hours and hours.
When it's time for her to pass on, as they say, she'll know she didn't make it upstairs if she hears a metronome. Yes, indeed. So anyway, but here's the value of the metronome for me, because I think of time as a universal constant, like a force of nature. Now we manipulate time, and I see that as meter. You know how we subdivide it. But time exists as a universal constant. So when you take that guesswork out of the equation, you have another way to judge your accuracy and precision. So you set the metronome at a slow but steady pace, and I start out playing a simple scale in whole notes. You know, so 4 clicks on a slow metronome. And the purpose of this is I build up strength. I can focus on vibrato and touch and manipulating the sound of the instrument, because you can do so many things with the slightest alteration in the pressure or the angle of your finger on the string. But you don't know this if you're so busy trying to run past it. You don't get to investigate the possibilities in every attack. And then, because I started out as a bass player, either playing with my fingers or with a bow, I had been playing guitar, at the same time. Most of my training and my practice was so the pick was always a mystery. How do I get this to strike the string at the exact moment when I'm depressing it with my left hand? So playing scales slow really helps me to refocus on that accuracy, and it becomes quite apparent when I'm playing much more complicated groupings of notes, if I've been practicing or not. Because if it's clean, I've been practicing. If it's not, well, it's hit or miss. And so I think having 20 minutes or 30 minutes of your hour and a half devoted to whatever you need to do to solve the technical issues of the day, whether it's string leaps or arpeggios and scales in 3 octaves, all of these things sort of solve problems that that playing jazz will bring up. Especially for guitar players, oftentimes we're trying to figure out how to voice a phrase that was developed by someone who played an instrument where the notes made better sense. When you hear Charlie Parker playing, if you can imagine, a lot of those fingerings, the notes are right there. They're sort of all right there in front of them. It's a very logical and it's just a very logical progression of note to note. On the guitar, it looks like Russian. I mean, it's just, it's
like a Rubik's Cube, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just, some of the things we have to do to translate that language to the fretboard require a certain kind of physical preparation to make it happen. And so, that kind of, starting out every day with that, devoting that time to practice to your technique will help you to solve those problems before they come up, and then when it happens, you're prepared. Right. And then, all right, so now you know how to get started. So then, you should try to accomplish something. Learn a song, learn a phrase, learn a solo, learn a new chord. Every day, you should set out to do something. It doesn't mean that if you have a day where you just sit down and play something you like, that you're a failure that day. It just means that most days, when you have limited time, you should approach it with a goal in mind. What am I trying to accomplish today? Not this month or this year, just today. What if I learn this one phrase today, I'm good. And if it takes me all week to learn it, it takes me all week. But I'm not going to give up until I get this. And I think if you can just sort of keep your eyes on the prize that way, before you know it, you look back at the calendar and you're like, man, I started this back in January and September. I'm not doing bad. You know what I mean? And I mean, it may sound kind of corny, whatever, But I mean, I know what it's like. You know, when I got out of school, you know, my sister, who was a stockbroker, got me a job on Wall Street. And, you know, I had to be there 8:15 in the morning, and I got home at 5. You know, and I had 2 hours or so to kind of like practice or do whatever had to be done, you know, just to survive. You know, go to the grocery store, whatever it was. And then I had to go out and pound the pavement at night in New York and try to get a gig somewhere, playing with somebody. You know, and I finally got a gig playing with the Harper brothers, Philip and Winard Harper. We played at the Blue Note from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m.
Wow.
Tuesday through Sunday. We only made $20 a guy.
Oh,
so
man.
I couldn't quit my day job. But I was meeting everybody. Because at that point, the Blue Note was the center of New York's jazz scene. You know, it wasn't like the Vanguard. But the Blue Note was where all the legends who had achieved some level of career success, this was their reward. Now they get to play at the Blue Note and make a boatload of cash. So this was their reward. So I got to hang out with, you know, with Ray Brown, with Oscar Peterson, with Joe Pass, you know, with Freddie Hubbard, you know, with Elvin Jones. I saw all these people there. But I had to be at work at 8 a.m. So, you know, I would play till 4 a.m. I didn't get home until 4:45 or 5. I could sleep for a couple hours and then repeat, you know. It was that Tom Cruise, you know, live, die, repeat, live, die, repeat. So,
wow.
Right? So
that's dedication, man.
So, you know, for sure. But I mean, you know, it was dedication, but then look at the life I've lived. I just sat at the bar with George Benson for a half an hour. I could do this. I could do this a couple more nights and not get me sleep. You know, and I'm 20 years old. This is the time to do it. So what I'm saying is that I know what it feels like to have more to do than there are hours in the day. But so you just have to take a little piece of it and work that out, and then move on. A little piece and move on. You know, and you keep doing it. And I promise, if you stick to it, you make some progress. How much progress depends on, you know, how hard. It just depends on the individual. But some progress is everybody's reward for hard work, right? So, all right. So I don't want to skip over that Joe Pass story because I love
I'm sorry to cut you off,
but please,
I was just kind of dying to ask you those questions before, man. So that was fantastic to, I think people are really going to enjoy that practice advice. But yeah, but maybe before we wrap up the interview, man, I'd love to hear some stories about Joe Pass, because you know Joe Pass is one of the most liked jazz players in my audience, and of course, you know, everyone knows Joe Pass, so it'd be great to hear some stories, man.
All right, so I had been in Seattle for half of the school year. You know, what became my final year of high school. And while I was playing guitar in the jazz band, I still played bass in the school orchestra. That was kind of the band, the music, our music instructors deal with me. All right, I know you played bass in New York, so I need you to play bass in the orchestra, and then you can play guitar in the jazz band. So the orchestra was taking a trip to Disneyland in California, you know, in California, as you know, a reward for some school concert we hit down that was pretty decent, you know. So they flew us down to California, and we were going to give a performance at Disneyland for some kids. But you know, I was always kind of that kid who would sneak away from the crowd, do my own thing, and so at some point I disappeared and just was kind of wandering through Disneyland. And I just remember walking through those giant teacups that spin around, you know, and then I saw this, what looked like a nightclub, but you know, it's Disneyland, so it's not real. And I could swear I heard some jazz in there. So, you know, I walk in, and there are people sitting at tables, and there's a guy on stage. It's Joe Pass by himself at Disneyland at like 2 in the afternoon.
Of all places.
Sitting on a chair with a little polytone next to him, holding a 175, you know, eyes closed, rocking back and forth with that smile, playing standards. So I sat there and watched him for 45 minutes, and then I had to get back to my classmates. So I left and I said, "Guys, you won't believe what I saw." They were like, "Who? What? Who's that?" And so all right. So now that was probably April of 1983. So then cut to September of 83. Now I'm enrolled at Berkeley. I'm in Boston. And there's a sign up that Joe Pass is going to be giving a master class at the music store right down the street from Berkeley. So of course I sit up front, and he was kind of a cranky dude. He was not known for the warm fuzzies, that's for sure. But he was very real about what he did. If you asked him a question, he answered it. So he was very patient, and he talked to the students and all that. And at the end, I told him that I had seen him at Disneyland. And he said, "Oh, that's the weirdest thing." He said, "But through some deal with the musicians union, like a jazz outreach program or something, Disneyland would pay established musicians a large sum of money to come out and just play jazz all afternoon." He's
Wow.
He's like, "You can see anybody in there, all these legends would be in there playing, it's a great gig." And I was like, "Okay." I see.
Isn't that crazy?
That was odd. So, but that was my way. That was my in with him. We talked about that for a second, and so then I asked him a few questions, and one of the things I wanted to know was, how do you constantly move everything at the same time? And he said, "I don't." He said, "But I create the illusion of constant motion by always moving at least one thing all the time." He said, "Either there's a bass line moving, or there's a melody note moving, or there are inner voices moving, but there's some motion always happening." And he said, because it's not always just one thing, it creates this really pleasant sort of arc. If you were looking at it on a graph, this is boring, this is interesting, right? So moving the voices and alternating the motion back and forth is what helped him to create drama and resolution. And so then
because it's with the solo guitar thing, it's almost like the audience's mind kind of fills in the blanks. It's almost like you're suggesting all these different parts of the band, but when it's combined together, it's much more than it appears much more than it actually is sometimes, I think.
Well, sure. And if you leave too many blanks, the audience's mind fills in with their cell phone. It's like, all right, let me get out what's happening in solitaire. You know what I mean? So you want to be engaged, you want to keep people engaged. So I'll just tell you one more part to that story, and then
for sure, man.
So now, that my freshman year, I talked to Joe for 20 minutes, and that's it. I go on. I didn't see him for 3 or 4 years. So now I had moved to New York, and I hadn't gotten that job yet playing in the late night band. So I was just walking around trying to see what I could see and meet who I could meet. And I saw that Joe Pass was doing a double bill at the Blue Note with George Shearing in his quintet. So George Shearing was playing with his quintet. They'd play, 50 minutes, and then Joe Pass come out and play 30 minutes, and that was a full show. So while George Shearing was on stage, I told the guy at the door that I was going to meet Joe. And I sort of stretched the truth a little bit and let him believe that Joe was expecting me. Because believe me, he was. So then, so I get past the door, and I certainly didn't pay. And I knocked on Joe's dressing room door, and he opened the door. I'm like, "Yeah, kid, what do you want?" He didn't recognize me, and I wasn't gonna say, "Oh my God, you met 4 years ago," about Disneyland. I just said, he had an old buddy of his from Brooklyn, and they were smoking big cigars and drinking scotch and telling stories. And the last thing he wanted to do was be interrupted by some kid he didn't know on his break. But there I was. So he says, "What do you want, kid?" And I said, "Oh, sir, I'm a big fan. I play guitar. I was just wondering if I could get a lesson." or just, you know, a few minutes. And he looks at his buddy and says, hey, you know, hey, Mikey, this kid wants a lesson. And they're kind of like, you're an idiot, kid. You know, like, you serious? But then there I was. And he's just like, oh, what the hell? Come on in. So he let me in. And he's like, I'm not going to give you a lesson. He said, well, you know, play something and we'll see. So he gives me his guitar. And he played a 175, you know, whatever. And so now I didn't expect any part of this plan to work.
Yeah. What have I got myself into? You're probably thinking
right
now.
I'm sitting in his small dressing room with his guitar in my lap, with him and one of his old buddies, you know, childhood friends, and they want me to, and they're like, impress me. So I really want to say, okay, good night, it was nice to meet you, and run. But so there I am. So I went into automatic pilot. This is why practicing so much is good. I started to play a song that I had written that sounded kind of like a standard, you know, and I'm playing along, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. You know, there are elements that sounded familiar. But this guy knows every song that was ever written, you know, from sort of that, you know, and he's like, And finally, as I got back around to the second A, I'm only 8 bars in, he says, hold on, what song is this? And I said, oh, it's this song. He said, wait, did you write that? He said, how the hell can I tell how you play on a song I don't know? Play something I know. You know, it turned on me that quick. I was, oh, God. So then I quickly went into We'll Be Together Again, you know, the old standard. Start playing it. And he's like, oh, okay, that's the one. All right, good. And so I'm playing it, you know, and he's like, all right, not bad. Oh, I like it. Okay, oh, cool. So when I played 2 choruses, that's it. You know, I gave him my best Joe Pass impression. But what's funny is he didn't see it that way. When it was over, I said, well, clearly you can see how much I admire you playing. He's like, I appreciate you saying that. He said, but you sound like George Benson. And I mean, of course, that's high praise, but only if that's how I meant to sound. Like I was really trying to sound like him. So for him to tell me that, I felt like I failed, you know, like he saw right through me. and he said, what I mean is your feel, the way your notes move, the kind of bounce you have, it's very reminiscent of George's feelings. And I said, and he said, I want you to know that's one of the best things about George's playing is the way the notes feel. You know.
Wow.
And right. You know, and he said, stick around, you know. And I shook his friend's hand, you know, like, all right, got it, kid. You know, stick around, watch the show. And so I think he told somebody to tell the manager, you know, let him stay, whatever. And so I stood on the side where I could have a direct line of sight to the fretboard. And he said a few words to the audience, and then he started playing We'll Be Together Again. And he played it for about 10 minutes, solo guitar. It was a masterclass that covered every possibility, permutation, inversion. You know, if I had recorded it, it's a masterclass for years. I just was watching, you know, just watching. And every once in a while, you know, every few bars, you kind of look up and glance at me, grin, just to make sure I was watching. He's like, "This is your lesson. These are all the things you should be getting together. Try this, try that, try this." It was basically just a conversation between myself and Joe, and the audience was there to watch. You know what I mean? And so I never forgot that, and I never forgot any part of that. I mean, the fact that, you know, he had probably what amounted to 45 minutes between shows to have a cognac and some dinner and catch up with his friends, and he took at least 15 minutes out of that to spend with some strange kid he never met. That it offered him nothing in return. I didn't come with a bag full of money. And the way that, you know, his generosity and his humanity at that moment. Because there are so many things that interfere with what we do, which is, we love music and we love to play. You know, there's racial issues and social, there's all these things that sort of prevent us from coming together and playing music. And the way that he just immediately put all that to the side to share a little bit with this kid, that made a lot, that inspired me to move forward. And so I remember that every time someone asks me, do you teach or you can have a lesson? I don't always have time to give a lesson. I don't always feel like teaching. But if you want to play for a few minutes, you want to ask me a question, you got my attention. What's going on? You know what I mean? And so I recognize the value in that because, he had no idea that 10-minute exchange between us was going to lead to so much for me. And then years later, when I started making records, I would see him on the road and say, yes, I like what you're doing. He'd leave me a note, sorry I missed you tonight, that kind of thing. And I consider him to be, a good friend right up until he passed, and then it was so odd. I years later, because you rarely ever meet the family members like these guys. You think of this guy who comes down from Mount Olympus, plays guitar. You forget he's just a regular dude, right, with family. And so a few years went by, and I was headlining my own band at the Blue Note. And on the break, this guy comes, he's like, hey, I'm so-and-so. He was Joe Pass's nephew. And he said, yeah, Uncle Joe would be proud, but he would come up and unplug your chorus pedal. He said, Uncle Joe always said that was cheating. If you want to hear some oscillation, play a chord with some dissonance.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, oh man, it got me again, Anyway, that's
another lesson from beyond.
Right, exactly. He reached out from beyond and smacked me upside the head.
Cool, man. Well, I have to say, I feel like I'm in a similar situation, man, because, like this is, it's a bit kind of selfish, I guess, but for me, this is one of the best lessons I've ever had in guitar playing, man. Just listening to your talk, it's awesome, man. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on, man. Yeah. So, but before we go, something I'd really like to talk to you about is your brand new album called Grace, which should be released about the time that this interview is going to come out. So yeah, I'd love you to share this album with our audience here. So yeah, please tell us about it, Mel.
Okay, so both of my sons are musicians. Mark Jr. is a great drummer, and he's a Berklee grad. And Davis Alexander is a great piano player, also a Berklee grad. And, they grew up hanging out with Dad, playing music. We always kind of played together, and I encouraged them to develop their own relationship, with music and expression and the whole thing. And they were always not only welcome, but I encouraged them to come play with me and be a part of it, so we could share this musical journey together. Especially when they were kids, because I had already sort of embarked on this journey, and I wasn't going to leave them behind. I wanted to share with them. And so, I just couldn't be happier or more proud of the way that they drew inspiration from what they saw me doing, and have gone on to really, take us to the next level. They use the advantages of growing up around musicians and having information and having access to good musicians to talk to really get a head start on solving some of these grand equations that playing jazz and playing music can present. So they're working around the scene here in New York. Mark has recently recorded an album as a member of Kenny Garrett's group, and he is working with him off and on the road. I think more on now than off, which is great. We're very proud of him. There's not many better gigs in the world than playing with Kenny Garrett. So he's doing great. And Davis, similarly, he's developing a reputation for being one of New York City's, and jazz in general, one of the most interestingly refreshing and historically astute players that we have. He's 23, but he has an amazing command of not only the instrument but of the history. Without sounding like without sounding like making you feel like you're at an exhibit at the Smithsonian. He somehow gives you 100 years of jazz piano in a space of a 60-minute set with his trio, and it's refreshing and it's rare. And I don't know that he really understands. He may. I don't know that he understands how significant that is. But I'm really proud of his progress and what he's doing. He's leaving tomorrow to go to Doha in Qatar for 2 months to play at the jazz club there in the hotel. So we'll miss him, but I know he's going over there to have a good time. He'll come back having progressed leaps and bounds playing over there. He just can't beat that. So, all right. So a long story short, or long story long, we got one of their good friends, a great bass player, Yasushi Nakamura, who I met when I was doing master classes at Juilliard, the jazz program there. And he played with Mark and some of the groups they played together in New York. And we went and we started doing some shows around as a quartet, the Whitfield family band or whatever it is, and so we recorded a record, and it basically is a collection of new versions of old songs and some new songs, and so nothing is played exactly the way it used to be. We took some songs that I had played that for me were significant chronologically, as points in our lives. A song that I wrote about Davis, a song I wrote about a story that I had, and so these songs have been repurposed, so to speak, and had new sections written, and that's what Grace is all about. And then we did something. So the music, so some of it is very hard driving straight ahead. Some of it's kind of beautiful ballad. Then there's some groove things. It's all the same instrumentation: upright bass, drums. Davis plays piano and a little Fender Rhodes, and guitar. And there's some chorus pedal on there. Sorry, Joe. But
just check that in.
Right. But yeah, but then we did this one song. And I had my cousin Cy Smith. She is one of the world's foremost background studio singers. She's just one of those people. She started out with Whitney Houston in the '80s. That she was one of the background singers in the vocal coach for American Idol when it was big here in the States. She's toured with just about everybody at some point, and now she's. I got her in Chris Bodie's band when I was in the band, and she's back with him again. So anyway, we had this one song, and it just felt like it was a really good spot for her to sing on the family record. She's family, and we got this one song. And so we recorded it as a band. I sent it to her, and she wrote some lyrics and sang it and sent it back. And it brought tears to my eyes. It's just I think it's beautiful. So that's the title. That's the title track, and I'm really proud. I think it's gonna be. I hope that it's the first of many. But if it is the only one, I'm satisfied because it's me and my kids.
Wow! Oh, what an amazing way to make an album, like with your whole family. And yeah, it sounds like you're really passionate about it. And I personally can't wait to hear it, man. So for all of you watching or listening right now, check it out. I'll put a link to Mark's album in the show notes for this session. But maybe, Mark, we could hear a track right now off the album, if you're willing to play one for us now.
I am. We'll play the title. We'll play Grace, the title track.
thee. It's stronger than that look upon your face. It's big enough to keep your fear in place. It moves about freely, almost never leaves a trace. It asks for nothing in return. By definition, this is grace. But for grace, I could see a love for what it truly is to me. But for I could be lifted from all this misery. But for when you live in truth, it's never a mystery. Your grace and your love give me sweet serenity. But for I could see your love for what it truly is to me. Oh, I could be lifted from all this misery. Ooh, when you live in truth, it's never a mystery. Your grace and your love give me sweet serenity.
Mark Whitfield's new album, Grace, with the title track Grace being played there. And finally, Mark, I'd like to really thank you for taking the time and being so generous. You know, you were talking about how Joe Pass was, really kind to you that day, letting him sit in. And I feel pretty much the same right now, man. I've personally got a huge amount out of this session, and I'm sure that this is there was so much gold in this session today, man. I think people are going to have some really excellent takeaways. Hearing directly from the master, so to speak, to hear someone that's really walked the walk and spent some time with some of the greatest jazz players of our time. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you once again, Mark, for coming on the show today. And have you got any kind of final words of inspiration or advice for all of our viewers or listeners today?
Well, I mean, as if I haven't gone on and on and on long enough about all the
not
things
at all, man.
I just like to leave everybody with the thought that music is here for us to enjoy. So I go about it from that perspective. It's my job. It's how I make my living. It's how I interface with my friends. But it's here for us to enjoy. The more that I put in, the more that I get out. I find that working on the smaller things, paying attention to detail, and holding on to small building blocks has been what has given me the ability to get to my inner voice, and that's the greatest joy that I've experienced with music. And so I hope that the things I've said are in some way helpful for each one of you to get to find your inner voice, because that's a beautiful feeling,
Yeah, for sure, man. What a wonderful way to end the interview. So thank you once again, Mark. And just before we wrap up, where's the best place to find you? Probably a website would be good to tell people about, and also where people could find your album too.
All right. So my website is markwhitfield.com. I do a fairly decent job of keeping it updated with the tour dates and information, and the link, there's always a link there to places you can either find me or find the record. cdbaby.com is sort of my default partner for distribution, both physical and electronic, and so I think they do a great job. They make sure that everything's available on Amazon and iTunes, whatever your particular vendor of choice is. And then, I recently have become active on Facebook. So there's a Facebook, the official page of Mark Whitfield, because there's some kind of an electronic generated fan site that's not me. There's an official Mark Whitfield, the guitarist page, and that has I put up videos and lots of and so I have all these clips and videos and things that I've done either with my band or as a guest with great musicians, and they're just kind of sitting in the closet. So I've been putting them up, on Facebook and sharing with people. So you can find me there or on Instagram, the same kind of thing. And so I'm starting to learn and appreciate the value of the access that you have with our various social media sites to connect with people who love music around the world. It's wonderful. And hopefully I'll see you guys down there soon.
I'll definitely be sending people your way, Mark. So
all right.
Well, I'll make sure I'll include all those links in the show notes, as I said, and So to everyone out there, make sure that you get a copy of Mark's album. I think it's a really exciting project Mark's been doing with his family, and it sounds really special. So get your copy at markwhitfield.com and the websites Mark mentioned. But yeah, we might wrap it up there, Mark. So thanks very much for your time today, man.
Absolutely, thanks for having me. I hope to see you again soon.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Mark Whitfield. You can find Mark at markwhitfield.com. And yeah, just a reminder, his new album, Grace, it should be out by the time that you see this interview. So make sure that you head over to his site and get a copy and support one of the finest jazz guitarists of our generation. So yeah, once again, markwhitfield.com. And if you want to find all the notes and links for this episode, just head over to FretDojo.com FretDojo.com/Mark Whitfield, and you'll be able to find everything that we covered today. Very exciting stuff. So, yep, that's a wrap for now. My name's Greg O'Rourke, and yeah, look forward to seeing you in another episode of Fret Dojo. Bye for now. And for more jazz guitar lessons, tips, and free stuff, visit www.FretDojo.com.